Welcome back. In this video, we'll be covering Learning Objective 3.3 in Chapter 3 for PSY 235 Social Psychology. In this part of the chapter, your authors are talking about cross-cultural research in social cognition and really kind of asking the questions, what is similar regardless of culture in terms of how social cognition works, and what are some of the differences? Now, just to preface this conversation, most of the cross-cultural research that social psychologists have done has really been limited to comparing so-called Western cultures, like Western Europe, the United States, Canada, are kind of the prototypical Western cultures, versus, for the most part, Asian and South Asian cultures. So China, Japan, India, Pakistan have gotten more attention than other kinds of cross-cultural studies. We do have, emerging research looking at more variability, like looking at South America, specific cultural differences within countries. Like across the United States, there are many different cultural differences depending on who you're looking at, where they live, and so on. So, I just wanted to, lay that out there. The findings that are going to be discussed in this part of the chapter are largely that East-West comparison, comparing U.S. Populations of participants with Eastern and Southeastern, Asian and South Asian populations. So to start, some cross-cultural investigations of social cognition really focus on the difference between what's called analytical thinking and holistic thinking. So to start, analytical thinking tends to focus on whatever object or person is right in front of you, and the surrounding context is less relevant and less important. In this style of thinking, this analytical kind of rational approach of paying attention to the object of our attention and kind of dismissing the importance of the context or the situation tends to be associated with Western style education. So Western Europe, the United States, Canada, we tend to focus on this rational analytical approach to evaluating our environments. Holistic style thinking, however, is more focused on overall context and really engaging in making sense of how things that we're focusing our attention on are related to one another. So if you're an analytical thinker and you're looking at a room full of people, you may hone in on very specific people and attempt to use your social cognitive skills to make sense of them without paying attention to the environment around them. In holistic thinking, by contrast, you're in a room full of people and they're all behaving, and you have to make sense of why they're doing that. If you hone in on one person, making a judgment about why they're doing what they're doing or what they're thinking is going to be contingent on your perception of all the other people in the room simultaneously. So let's say that at a party you see somebody really laughing really, really loud. You know that person at parties. They're just ha-ha-haing and everyone can hear it. If you're an analytical style thinker and you look at that person, you're like, that person is a real character. They think they're hilarious. Maybe they're not. They're just loud people. Not paying attention to what's going on in the rest of the room. The holistic thinking style person is going to look at that person who's laughing very loudly and say, wow, the person they're talking to must be hilarious for them to laugh that loudly. So what's been found in some of the cross-cultural research is that we tend to see a higher percentage of holistic thinking in Eastern cultures, like China, Japan, India, Whereas in Western cultures, like Western Europe, Canada, the United States, we tend to see more analytical style thinking. In part, this is associated with, just what our cultures tend to value, and how we tend to educate ourselves. It's not that people in these cultures can't think in both ways. Both, people regardless of their cultural context, are all capable of doing analytic thinking, and they're all capable of doing holistic. It's just that our environments can basically serve as a prime for triggering one style or the other. If your culture tends to value analytic, rational thinking very highly, you're going to tend to use that style of thinking more often. If your culture values paying attention to context and relations among objects, then you're likely to lean in that direction. If we prime, say, someone who is their natural tendency based on their culture and their upbringing is to be more holistic, but we prime them to be analytic, they're perfectly capable of being analytic. And the reverse is also true. If someone whose dominant style is analytic and we prime them with holistic information, they're perfectly capable of making judgments that are more holistic. Your authors profile some research by Nisbet and Masuda that's a typical kind of study in this area. In one of their studies, they show an animated video of an underwater scene, and they presented it to Japanese and American participants. What they found, or after they showed them the video, they asked them what they saw. So they asked them just sort of the open-ended question, what did you see? The American participants tended to be more likely to focus their attention on the biggest objects, so like the largest fish in the scene, whereas the Japanese participants tended to look at the background, looking at the smaller objects, the bubbles, the frog, the plants that are covered up, and then include those in their description of the scene. Japanese participants also were much more likely than Americans to talk about interactions among the things that they see. So, like, the frog was hiding behind the plants and then it jumped out. Some would talk about how one of the fish is swimming in the opposite direction of the others who are all traveling together. Those sorts of interrelationships, interdependencies were more likely to be discussed by the Japanese participants than the others. Another example of research done by Nisbet and Masuda, when they asked American and Japanese participants to take the instruction was take a picture of a person. The Americans tended to produce images that were face dependent. They were very face focused, so that those facial features could be examined easily. Whereas the Japanese participants tended to put the person in a wider context and show more of the environment. And, even you can think about more sophisticated ways that this could happen. How likely were they to blur the background and use more of a portrait approach to the picture? Americans were found to do that more often than Japanese participants. In my next video, I'll be covering Learning Objective 3.4, looking at problems that we have with controlled thinking. Why do we avoid using controlled thinking when it's much more likely to produce accurate judgments? And then what are some ways we can increase the likelihood people will use it?